Okay, so I thought it would be an interesting video if I shared a few of my own thoughts about this Amtrak derailment that happened near Philadelphia. First of all, I'm looking at this curve and I'm like, this is an extremely sharp curve for a railroad that expects to run high-speed trains. So, that's kind of weird. Also, you know what really makes me aggravated about this derailment? It could have been easily avoided. You see, this locomotive which was pulling the train, it is a ACS 64, and like all Amtrak locomotives, it is equipped with cab signal. The problem is, this section of track did not contain any cab signaling. So basically, this locomotive reads cab signals, and then it displays a speed limit. If you don't follow the speed limit, the brakes come on. But without a cab signal, there's nothing to tell it when it's going too fast. So it can travel 100 miles per hour at 50 mile per hour zone, and there'll be nothing telling it it's going too fast and it should stop. And that's the problem. No one wants to spend the necessary money to upgrade the safety to prevent things like this from happening. So when I looked at this picture, I actually didn't think this was a real derailment. At first I thought these were model trains I was looking at. And the reason why I thought that is because I actually have 3 HO scale Amfleet cars, and they always derail exactly like this. They always lay on their side, and they always derail towards the outside of the curve. And it's always a curve they derail on too, for some reason. So yeah. I'm guessing that's why those passenger cars cost me so much money, because their weight was distributed so evenly and so realistically that they actually derail like real passenger cars. Not that I actually wanted them to derail. They actually got damaged quite a lot because of the frequent derailments they kept getting in, and I can't use them anymore because their couplers are broken now. Anyway, when I saw this picture, hold on. Now, when I saw this picture the first time, the first thought that went through my head is, well, I suppose this is what happens when you let the United States government run a railroad. They're very great at getting in debt with China, but in fact, they have a special skill when it comes to that. A skill that no one on this planet is capable of doing. Like, it takes a special kind of skill to get into debt with someone in $19 trillion, and still counting. But like, when it comes to a railroad, they can't even manage to keep their trains on the track. I mean, it's not like the technology doesn't exist that could have prevented this. It's not even as if it just wasn't obtainable. All they really had to do was spend a few, well, obviously not a few dollars, but they had to spend some money, install cab signaling on this curve, then the train would have read the curve and said, oh, the speed limit's 50 on this curve, you should be slowing down. If the driver didn't respond, the brakes would have come on automatically. That's all they had to do to prevent this derailment. But did they? No, because the United States government is so inefficient when it comes to, dealing with the problem. They'd rather let the problem happen, talk about it for a little bit, and then just do absolutely nothing when it do nothing to fix it, basically. What I want to know is how many trains are going to have to derail on this curve before the company that owns this railroad finally comes to the conclusion we need to install cab signaling here and actually do it, rather than just talking about the fact that cab signaling is needed. Why not actually install it? I mean, seriously, the United States government is so it gets on my nerves so much how they always talk about what needs to be done, but no one actually does it. Like, how hard can it be to spend some money and hire some workers to install some technology on this curve? I mean, it's really easy to get in debt with China, apparently, but apparently it's the hardest thing in the world to take some of that money and spend it somewhere else, other than China. That being said, I gotta hand it to Siemens. They're really good at creating very high-tech locomotives. This locomotive was able to protect the driver despite the fact that it was going 50 miles per hour over the speed limit. The locomotive remained upright, it didn't fall on its side, during the entire crash, and the driver survived, albeit with an injury. Now, another question I have is, why are these windshield wipers in the upright position? Like, were they operating at the time of the derailment? Like, what could have happened to have caused that? Anyway. Now, I see lots of room for improvement with these passenger cars, though, as far as safety is concerned. Well, while not that many people died in this crash, which is actually pretty amazing considering how fast the train was going, I've noticed a little bit of what appears to be a flaw with the way these cars derail. They always seem to derail in a zigzaggy way, which in my opinion is not good at all. Like, for example, the French TGV, well, I remember reading, I'm not sure if this is true, but I remember reading that it's specifically designed to derail in a perfectly straight line until it comes to a complete stop. So I figured, why not implement that design here? Like, why not program these cars so that they can derail in a straight line? I actually think it would be safer if the cars could do that. And not only that, create some kind of a way that can prevent them from rolling on their side, because that's also an issue. Look at this. It says safety technology might have prevented deadly Amtrak crash. And I'm like, might have? How about it would have? News people don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, I was watching the news, and the mayor tried to blame the driver for this accident, saying that he was driving recklessly. I get annoyed when people do things like this. Like, a vehicle crashes, they automatically blame the driver as if it's automatically his fault. But they don't know anything that happened in that situation. They're not train drivers, so they're not even familiar with the operation of the system. They don't even know what they're talking about. They're in no position to just blame the driver. Now, when the driver explained basically in his own words what happened, it seems as though he may have been asleep in the situation, and if that's the case, it's not necessarily his fault. I mean, there is no legal limit for how much train drivers are forced to drive their vehicle. He may have been in a situation where he had to work a lot of hours to the point where any normal person would be tired. And in that case, it would be difficult not to fall asleep. In fact, this actually used to be a horrible issue in the trucking industry. Companies would basically force their drivers to drive all day and all night and basically tell them if they didn't drive, they would be fired. Truck drivers kept getting into accidents because obviously, if you don't go to sleep, your body's going to make you go to sleep eventually. So then the government stepped in and said, okay, you can't drive for more than 11 hours. That fixed the problem. Well, most of the time anyway. It fixed a good percentage of the problem anyway. There's still drivers that drive when they're tired, or they ignore the safety rules and then they end up falling asleep anyway. But anyone that's following the rules basically won't be driving longer than it would take for them to fall asleep. And I think that should be happening in the railroad industry as well. There should be a limit to how much they're forced to drive, because that could have been what caused this. Forcing them to drive when they're tired. I mean, you should never be operating a vehicle when you're tired, but obviously, if the company tells you, drive this train or I'm going to fire you, you're going to drive the train because you don't want to lose your job. And that could have been part of what caused this. Now, it's actually really possible that he could have been asleep. And the reason why I think this is because I actually used to drive a section of the Northeast Corridor on the train simulator. I think it was called Train Simulator 2015. And there were lots of situations where I actually did fall asleep while I was operating on that. And a lot of times I didn't wake up until it was too late. Basically, what would cause me to wake up was I'd be asleep and it would look like the train is operating normally, but something would sound abnormal, and then I'd be like, okay, something's not right. Then I would wake up. I actually remember one time I was in that game. I fell asleep, and then I woke up. And as soon as I woke up, I saw a red light. I tried to stop, but it was already too late. And next thing I know, I crashed into another train. So Yeah, being sleepy while driving actually can cause that. Now, trains are supposed to have an alert or reset button, obviously. Basically, it's a button where an alarm sounds. It'll warn you to press the button so that the train knows you're awake. If you don't push the button, then the brakes come on. But that doesn't solve this necessarily solve this problem either, and here's why. A conductor was actually explaining to me that he actually saw he's actually seen drivers being completely asleep but still pushing the button subconsciously, like they just know where the button is and they know how often they're supposed to push it, so they just do it in their sleep. And he said he even saw them blow their horns at railroad crossings in their sleep while this was happening as well. So the alerter doesn't solve the problem, even though a lot of documentaries and train simulators that I used to watch and play when I was a kid claimed that it solved the problem completely. I mean, they make it seem like it's the perfect solution to a sleepy driver, but clearly it isn't. Because if it was, that would have prevented this guy from falling asleep while driving. Now, I'm still very angry at the mayor of Philadelphia for calling this guy a reckless driver that was speeding basically trying to make him seem like a terrible person. Like when I saw him in the news, he didn't actually seem like a terrible person. I'm pretty sure he would not do anything like this on purpose. I'm pretty sure I can't imagine anyone that would just purposefully do this. So I don't think it's fair to call a driver reckless for this situation. Like, it's not necessarily his fault. The problem is they make drivers drive even when they're tired. The other problem is there was no cab signaling installed on this track that would have slowed down the train had it been going too fast in the first place. Really, there are a lot of people you can blame for this crash that aren't the driver. You could blame the railroad that owns this section of track, which is Amtrak, for not installing cab signaling that could have warned the train, hey, the speed limit's 50 miles per hour, but we're going 103, which is stop, and the brakes would come on automatically. You could, you could also blame them for for not hiring enough drivers so that the drivers won't have to be sleepy while they're operating the vehicle. I mean, seriously, the driver isn't necessarily the only one to blame in this situation. It's so weird how these cars came off the track, because they look exactly the way my HO scale Amfleet train cars do when they come off the track. Like, I actually once had a derailment that looked where the cars were facing this exact same zigzaggy way when they came off the track, and it was so weird. Anyway, this is actually a pretty horrifying picture. Like, look at this passenger car. Like, the bogies are facing this way on this side, and on the other side they're facing this way. So this one was literally twisted in this derailment. It's weird because they're made out of such strong material. Like, it's not really easy to just twist a train car. So that tells you something about how much force was at play in this derailment.